In this video, we'll learn how to use SPSS to test our data file for interactions, which are also called moderations as well. Now, moderation relates similarly to what we looked at last week on mediation. Remember, we said mediation explains the relationship between a predictor and a dependent variable in terms of a mediating variable. In other words, we have our basic indirect relationships happening. Similar to mediation, we have this concept called moderation. Moderation also concerns us with the relationship between one predictor and an outcome or a dependent variable. Now, there's also a third variable that we're interested in, and we call this third variable a moderator. However, unlike a mediator, which provides an indirect relationship between the independent and dependent variables that we're used to, a moderator actually interacts with the relationship between the IV and the DV. Now, rather than trying to give you the definition of interaction, let's look at this through an example because I think it will explain it better. Suppose we are interested in investigating if children who play more violent video games, which I'll denote as VVG, would have more aggressive personalities. Here, we're seeing how one predictor, time spent playing games, affects aggression levels. Now, suppose we interviewed 60 children and compared the number of hours of playing violent video games per night was on some sort of aggression test. If we were to plot this particular data on a scatter plot, it might look something like this. If I was to add a regression line through this particular chart, we get this line here, and I can see that there is a positive correlation between aggression and time spent playing violent video games. In other words, as time spent playing violent video games increase, so too did levels of aggression. But suppose there was more to the story than that, and that we believed a third variable was moderating this particular relationship, which means this third variable is affecting or interacting how these variables behave. Suppose we have some additional information on the children's parents' police records, specifically relating to domestic violence. So we have some children whose parents do not have a record, who do have a record of domestic violence, which I've highlighted in red here. And we have children whose parents do not have any sort of record of domestic violence at home. Now, suppose this new variable, record or no record, which I just lazily called group, is believed to moderate the relationship between time spent playing violent video games and aggression. Recall earlier that this is our scatter plot for time versus aggression, and that this scatter plot is for all of the children in this particular sample. Now, instead of looking at all the children, what if we actually identified these children or these data points by their group as well? So instead of all black points here, we identified the record children or the children who have parents with police records as red, and the ones with no records as green. If we look at the relationship between time and aggression for the record group only, then it would appear there is still indeed a strong positive relationship between time spent playing violent video games and aggression. However, if we only look at the children from the no record group, then we can see that there is only a very weak relationship between time spent playing violent video games and aggression. Given these differences, using the original scatter plot would not paint a very clear picture of what is really happening. Depending on the child's group, so record or no record, the relationship between time spent playing violent video games and aggression is quite different. Therefore, what we're saying is that depending on the group or the variable group is moderating or interacting with the relationship between time spent playing violent video games and aggression. So, in other words, the combined effect of two variables on another is conceptually known as moderation or interaction. Now, mathematically, a moderator is the product of two variables, which just means you multiply two variables together. Let's see how we would look at interaction now in SPSS. Now, there are two ways to do this, which I've labeled here. The first way, for those of you who aren't particularly fond with mathematics and algebra and rearranging equations and all that. The second way is for those of you who don't mind maths so much. If you are good with maths, or at least comfortable around maths, you might save yourself a little bit of time, maybe 2 to 5 minutes, whereas the first method will probably take you a bit longer because you have to do two analyses, but it's ideal for those of you who don't like maths. The main difference really is the last two steps here, because if you look at steps 1 and 2, they're the same for both of them anyway. Let's have a look at the first method now, the ones for those of you who aren't too fond with maths, and I'll show you how to use SPSS to check for moderation. Earlier, I said that moderation, mathematically, is the product of the multiplication of two variables. So for this particular example, what we have to do is multiply the two variables group and time together, which will create the moderating variable. In order to do this, I've opened up the SPSS data file here, and it's very important that you actually correctly identify your variables. This first variable is our grouping variable, so the record or no record group, which I've colored in red. And I believe 0 just means they have no record, and 1 means they do have a record. The second column, the one in green, represents the time spent playing violent video games by each of the children. What we're going to do is tell SPSS to multiply all the values in the first column, group, by all the values in the second column, time, and create a new variable here, which we'll call moderator or something like that. In order to do this, what you have to do is click on transform and then compute variable. This opens up the compute variable dialog box. We start off by naming our moderator. Now you can call this whatever you want. Moderator, group multiplied by time, whatever. Although I did mention a little asterisk here because SPSS doesn't like certain symbols when you're naming variables. So you can't have like space bars or certain characters, otherwise you'll get this command. If you do, just delete it and name it something like a one-word variable. In this particular case, I called this new variable group times time. Next, you'd bring over one of the two variables which we're multiplying together. So I began by bringing over group first. Click on the group variable in this large rectangle here. Click on the arrow button and it will bring it over into the numeric expression box. Now remember earlier I said that mathematically it is just the multiplication of the two variables. So what we have to do next is click on the multiply button, which will bring it up into the numeric expression as well. Now we bring over the second variable, in this case time, into the numeric expression box. And if you look at it, what we're saying is, what we're telling SPSS is create a new variable called group times time, which is given by all the numbers in the group variable multiplied by all the values in the time variable. And this is what will happen once you click OK. Now you can see it quite clearly here. Anything times 0 will give you 0. So any person who has a coding of 0 in their group will still be 0 here. And anything times 1 is just itself, which you'll see here as well. Now after you do that, you run your basic regression model once again. So analyze regression and linear to open up the linear regression dialog box. And now you bring over all your variables of interest. Our DV is still regression. Our main focus is time. I also have group as well. But most importantly, make sure you bring over the new moderator that you just created, which is group times time. You get a whole bunch of output as always, but the one we're most interested in here is the coefficients table. If you read across the bottom row, which is our moderator row, you can see that its associated p-value is 0.004, which we know is less than 0.05. Therefore, the moderator, or there is a significant interaction between our two variables, between between time and aggression. Now we knew this already because we saw the scatter plots. But now we actually can say it's significant because we have the p-value as well. Now the next thing we can do is determine the regression equation to predict aggression. To begin, this is our constant, 3.85 to 2 decimal places. The beta value is minus 1.81 to 2 decimal places times group, plus 0.24 multiplied by time, plus 0.66 multiplied by our moderator group times time. This is our regression equation for predicting aggression. However, what we should do is simplify this down further. The fact that we have a dichotomous grouping variable technically means we should break it down to have a separate equation, one for each of the groups. Now this is where the steps start to differentiate. For those of you who don't like mathematics, we're going to show you how to do this in SPSS now. It does require an extra few steps, and then I'll show you the slightly quicker way for those of you who are comfortable with mathematics. So this particular method, we need to split our data and then run another model and interpret the individual equations. Let's see how this is done. To begin, you click on Data, go down to Split File, which opens up the Split File dialog box. From there, we need to make sure we click on the Compare Groups button, and then bring over our grouping variable, and then click OK. You don't actually get anything in the output, except for this little sentence here. So sort cases by group, split file laid by group. Now what this means is any further analysis we conduct will actually be split by our grouping variables. You'll see what this means in a moment. The next thing we have to do is run another regression analysis, so analyze regression and linear, but this time remove all the other predictors except for the main one, time itself. So make sure the grouping variable and the moderator aren't in your independence box. If you click OK, you get a whole bunch of output, but every single one of them will be split by our two groups, record and no record, as you can see here. Now the interpretation is still the same, just now we have to do it twice, one for the no record group and one for the record group. For the no record group, we can obtain the regression equation the exact same way we've done before. So we look at the values in the unstandardized coefficients beta column. Here we can see the constant is 3.854 or 3.85 to decimal places plus 0.24 multiplied by time. If you recall from, I believe it's week 2, when we're interpreting the basic slope, all we're doing is looking at the value in front of the predictor and saying something like, for every additional hour of time spent playing violent video games, aggression was 0.240 units higher. And we do the exact same thing for the second group as well. Here the constant is 2.04, which is the first part of our equation, and the second part is plus 0.90 multiplied by time. In other words, for every additional hour of time spent playing violent video games, aggression was 0.90 units higher. Based upon these two regression equations, we can see that there is a very different relationship between aggression and time spent playing violent video games, depending on which group you belong to. In the no record group, aggression only increased by 0.24 units, whatever that refers to, for every additional hour. Whereas for the other group, the record group, it increased by 0.9 every hour. This is basically 4 times the amount almost of increase in aggression, which is quite substantial. So it's very important to know that this relationship here is heavily moderated by the variable group or record, no record. But that's how you would do it if you weren't too comfortable with mathematics. It does take a bit longer, not terribly longer, but now I'll show you the other method as well, which I think is quite important because there is, I think, 1 or maybe 2 questions on topic test 4, which does require you to do this, but it's very simple maths, so I'll show you how to do it now. Let's revisit the full equation from earlier where we had the moderator included in the model. One way to, or another way, unlike what we just did with SPSS, to obtain the regression equations is to substitute in the actual coding values and then solve for each group. In other words, we'll have to do this twice, one for the no record group and one for the record group. Now from SPSS, I know that the no record group is coded with zeros. So what this means is, and I'm doing this for the first group first, wherever I see the word group, I'm going to replace it with the value 0. For example, the first one here, that becomes 0, and the second one becomes 0 as well. Now this is quite easy because anything times 0 gives you 0, so you can remove it straight from the equation. What we're left with is 3.85 plus 0.24 times time. From the second line here, just to re-emphasize, 1.81 or negative 1.81 times 0 is 0, so that's gone. And this part here, 0.66 times 0 times time, that's also gone because that's 0. And that leaves us with just 3.85 plus this part here, 0.24 times time. And that's the equation for the no record group. So like I said, it does require some mathematics, but not as hard as it seems. Recall earlier when we did this with SPSS, where you had to actually split the file and run another regression analysis. You still get the same equation here as well. But if you're comfortable with mathematics, by all means, just go ahead and solve it like that. I'll now show you how to do it with the second one. So same thing, start with your full equation, find out how it's coded. In this case, it's coded with a 1. So wherever we see group, we replace the number 1. First off, anything multiplied by 1 is just itself. So negative 1.81 times 1 will still give us negative 1.81. That's easy enough. Second part, 1 times time, this part here in the brackets, is just time, so 1 time. So that part there stays the same. Now, mathematically, the way we deal with things in brackets is that if it has the same component in brackets, you're allowed to add them and subtract them and do all sorts of funky things with them. Here we have two things which have the same thing in brackets, time, 0.24 time and 0.66 times to be specific. So what I can do is just do 0.24 time plus 0.66 time. So 0.24 plus 0.66 is 0.90, and you leave the thing in bracket as it is, which is just time. Finally, the first part of the equation, 3.85 minus 1.81, well, that's just a basic math you can do in your calculator. That gives you 2.04. So the equation becomes aggression for the record group is 2.04 plus 0.90 multiplied by time. And lo and behold, it's the exact same thing you'd get if you'd used SPSS to split the data, run the regression, and interpret the output. Okay, and that's how you would do it using mathematics without having to do the extra step in SPSS. I've shown you both methods because I know as learners we all have our preferred ways of doing things. There's no reason you can't do one way or the other way or both if you prefer. Just use whatever you're familiar with or more comfortable with, sorry. Keep in mind that for topic test 4 there is 2 questions which do require you to know this method. So practice the questions in the text and so on, and if you have any problems just email me or let me know and we can work our way through them together.